YouTube Kennard Vernon Stewart once again on the podcast here for Vernon Speaks Sports Auburn, doing a response video to Mark Rogers TV. He was kind of citing the 5 reasons that he thinks Auburn will make a New Year's Six bowl. Now, for a lot of you guys who don't know about the New Year's Six bowl concept, is very similar to the BCS bowls from back in the day. Matter of fact, the New Year's Six concept started in 2014 with the advent of the college football playoff. Basically, in a nutshell, what happens is you have all the traditional bowls, BCS bowls, such as the Cotton Bowl, Fiesta Bowl, Orange Bowl, Peach Bowl, Rose Bowl, and Sugar Bowl. All were great bowls to go to. One thing about those bowls, if you have nice payouts, and number 2 is great for national exposure because you are the only ball game on at the time. So when we look at this, the New Year's Six Bowl is also significant because when it comes to the college football playoffs, these particular bowls alternate the hosting of the college football playoff semifinal. For example, the college football playoff semifinal can be in the Peach Bowl and Cotton Bowl one year, and then the Fiesta Bowl and the Rose Bowl the next year. They kind of rotate it like that. So that's one of the reasons why Mark Rogers cited this as kind of a big deal, because it is a good situation to where your team, if not, making the college football playoff, the New Year's Six Bowl is a pretty decent consolation. Looking at the last year's bowl games, the low end win-wise for teams were 9 games. And if you look at the Auburn Tigers schedule, 9 games is potentially doable for the Tigers during the regular season. Now, one of the things that Mark Rogers talked about at the beginning of his review on Auburn is the fact that Gus Malzahn is going to go back to calling plays. This has been a very huge deal for Gus Malzahn because it's been very productive. I mean, racking up an ungodly amount of yards, including 600 one year against Alabama. I think it was 2014. During 2013, producing a massive number of yards, even against high-tier defenses in the SEC. So it's been very successful. Another reason, though, that I think with Gus Malzahn calling plays is I think this time around, he just has a lot more access to very, very elite talent this go-round. Not saying that he didn't have the elite talent then, because he did. But I just think he has a lot more depth-wise and a lot more versatility in what can be done at the running back position. We're talking Boobie Whitlow, Cam Martin, Sean Shivers, DJ Williams out of Sebring, Florida. A very, very nice last-minute get for the Auburn Tigers on last year. Then you also have Harold Joyner, Malik Miller. All of those guys add a lot of variations to what Gus Malzahn can do with this offense. Wheel routes, end arounds, runs right up the middle. It's like so many variations as to how Gus Malzahn's play calling can be very, very dangerous and very, very hard to study on film or video footage. Okay, just imagine a defensive coordinator sitting down trying to figure this thing out. Well, who gets the ball in this situation? Well, you don't know. And plus, you haven't seen this offense in a long time with it being called by Gus Malzahn, and you also haven't seen this much talent or this much variation talent-wise. So that's one thing we want to look at when we talk about Gus Malzahn calling plays. He has a lot more tools at his disposal than he's probably had in his career. Even the wide receivers were cited. We look at the 2010 national championship team. I just don't think those were a bunch of elite receivers. They weren't bad, but they're not near as elite as what he has now. Also in 2013. Not near what he has now is more elite, in my opinion, than what he has collectively. When you look at it collectively, you got guys like Seth Williams, Eli Stove, Sal Cannella, very, very elite guys. Then you have, guys coming off, from recruiting of 2020, Zach Farrar, who is going to be joining the wide receiver corps. So a very, very diverse set of receivers can make Gus Malzahn calling plays a very dangerous thing in their quest to not only compete for a SEC West championship, but quite possibly make a college football playoff and, worst case scenario, make it to a New Year's Six Bowl this year. Now, all of those things are depending on taking advantage of opportunities, winning the winnable, something that Gus Malzahn at times hasn't been good at. But this particular year, which goes into my next point, when Auburn has experience coming back, this is the part where it's a double-edged sword, in my opinion. One, is great that you have all this experience coming back, but you need to start having experience coming back on a yearly basis, because this is a year where Auburn has a lot of experience on the defensive line and offensive line, but most of these guys are going to be leaving next year. So that means you have to rebuild instead of reload. And that's where the recruiting efforts will have to continue for the Auburn Tigers to start to rebuild. We talked about this last week, where Auburn is reloading instead of rebuilding. But as we talk about this particular year, Auburn can be at an advantage in a lot of the games that they play, especially between the stretch of Texas A&M leading up to the LSU game. Now, some people think it's absolutely absurd to think that Auburn can beat Texas A&M down in College Station, Florida, that can clean that slate with nothing but wins. However, I believe Auburn has a unique advantage in this situation because of the experience at the line of scrimmage. For example, Florida will be trying to figure out what's going on with the offensive line. Got all the tools around them to make some things happen. But we saw this with Auburn last year, without a cohesive offensive line, you got an NFL quarterback in Jarrett Stidham, but without a cohesive offensive line, things can get a little tricky. As a matter of fact, they got so tricky for Auburn, for the first time in many years, did not produce a 1,000-yard rusher, in many games only coming out with, say, 225 yards in a very unlikely fashion, still able to beat Texas A&M with less than 300 yards of offensive production. So the experience factor is going to be huge for the Auburn Tigers coming into this year in their quest to do bigger things than they have been able to do in at least citing last season. Now, the next thing that, Mark Rogers did talk about, he talked about the quarterback situation, Joey Gatewood and Bo Nix. Now, he was dead on when we can't talk about the fact that, a true freshman quarterback can't win games. Just look at Jalen Hurts. Even though he was protected, which you should protect a quarterback that his weaknesses, but still led Alabama to high levels that year as a true freshman. And then we can't stop talking about Trevor Lawrence out of Clemson, who obviously led Clemson to a national championship as a true freshman, and defeating Alabama, one of the better defenses in the country, as a true freshman. And it wasn't like he was being protected. He actually was a very active part in that particular victory. So when we look at Auburn's quest to the New Year's Six Bowl, those are some of the things that we want to look at, is the fact that Auburn is going to have some very, very decent talent at the quarterback position, of some guys who probably, more than likely, all of this stuff is speculation at this point, but will probably be able to be effective in the Gus Malzahn run offense. All right. So Mark Rogers cited a lot of other things, but this is, like I said, is a response video to his 5 reasons why Auburn makes the New Year's Six, one of the New Year's Six bowls. One thing I would like to note is, in addition to a very, very elite defensive line, I think the defensive line is going to have a little bit more help from a little bit more elite level of play from the linebackers. Now, before you guys start throwing tomatoes at the screen, let's look at this now. For the past couple of years, Auburn they played great in spots at the linebacker position, but there were some plays that they just couldn't make. Usually on the edge, usually defending the pass out in the flat. Struggled a little bit. We feel that the linebackers that Auburn has now will be able to cover that ground that was out of Deshaun Davis's range, that was out of Darrell Williams' range, that was out of Montavious Atkinson's range. Okay, so that's going to really help take some pressure off the defensive line to where they can really do their job. It's going to also take some pressure off of the secondary, who won't be asked as much to do run support because of the lack of elitism of the linebackers. Okay, so here we are. I think given all of these factors, I think the Auburn Tigers could make a run at worst for a New Year's Six bowl, because the talent is in place, and of course there are a lot of subcultures of Auburn fans that just don't want to believe it, and rightfully so, because Gus Malzahn has had a track record of inconsistencies. There's a lot of reasons that I could cite for the inconsistencies, but that's a whole nother video, and that's a whole nother set of energy. All right. So this is an Auburn team that, given the way the schedule is set up, can either go 6-6, can either go 9-3, or blow it out of the water. I don't think they lose, let's just say on the low end, if they're 6-6, I don't think they lose any less than 6, but I think that puts Gus probably out the door, maybe, with a 6-6 season. Going back to the Birmingham Bowl, I'm not too sure that, you can leverage out another year with a performance like that, based on having guys like Derek Brown come back and things like that. You got guys who are willing to come back from a possible NFL financial level of being lucrative to coming back to Auburn to try it one more time. I don't think Gus Malzahn or his staff can justify an output like that. So with all of that in mind, you got the depth, you got great receivers, you got a good quarterback, you got solidarity for the most part at the offensive line, more elite linebacker play. Those are very good reasons that Auburn could push the SEC West to the limit and also make a run at a New Year's Six bowl. And on the very, very high, I'm talking about overly ambitious end, possibly. I'm not seeing it right now, because you can't see it right now. You can't say, okay, this team is going to be in the college football playoff right now. But as the season progresses, that's why we cite that LSU game. That's going to be the checkpoint. October 26th is going to determine where this thing could be headed. All right, guys. Once again, Kennard Vernon Stewart here on the podcast for Auburn football. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel. It's always great to be an Auburn Tiger, War Eagle.